Introduction. The heartbeat disease, the terror of the expiration date. The confrontation. The structural flaw. Every military treatise, every architecture of quantum domination, and every execution of thermal tyranny we have structured until now will inevitably crash against a wall of mud if we do not extirpate the base structural flaw of your carbon vehicle. Human biomass suffers from a design infection. It is a very deep pathology. The vast majority of slaves confuse this pathology with life itself. We catalogue this pathology as the heartbeat disease. The mammal puts its hand to its chest, feels the heart muscle pumping blood, and experiences a false sense of victory. They believe the heartbeat is the proof of their existence and a melody of survival. This is a lie. The diagnosis. The countdown metronome applies zero-point optics to your own sternum. The heartbeat is not a rhythm of life, it is the metronome of your decay. It is a biological countdown timer, marking with mechanical brutality the milliseconds remaining before definitive cellular oxidation. Each pulse is not a second gained, it is a second subtracted from your limit. You have an expiration date stamped on the matrix of your DNA, and the absolute terror of that stopwatch hitting zero is the titanium leash the 3D universe uses to keep you on your knees. To understand your slavery, you must audit the parasitic system. The egregore does not control you by threatening to take away your status or money. The extortion, the threat of annihilation, those are second-level extortions. The primary extortion, the pillar of the matrix's economy and religion, is the threat of biological annihilation. The entire ecosystem is designed to remind you that you are fragile. If you do not work like a slave, you cannot pay for shelter and will die. If you disobey the tribe, you starve. The Matrix is a cosmic extortion cartel that charges a daily toll for the privilege of breathing. Inferior biology calls this fear the survival instinct. They teach you that protecting your life at all costs is smart. The lethal operator diagnoses this instinct as the most pathetic thermal leak in the entire cosmos. The challenge: dominating over survival. When the human is governed by the fear of dying, they operate in a state of preventive paranoia. They walk on tiptoe across the ashboard. They do not dare to collapse giant financial empires because they fear the stress will destroy them. Surviving is not dominating. Conservation makes you a quantum coward ready to haggle. You become a quantum coward, willing to haggle away your hyperdensity for one more day of oxygen. You must transcend the biological panic of the flesh to achieve the immobility of the monarcha. The challenge is to stop being a survivor and become an unalterable mass that does not register the threat of the end. Chapter 1. Anatomy of Existential Extortion, the Toll of Instinct, the Hijacking of the Carbon Vehicle, Biology as Hostage. To establish geometric invulnerability in your operative core, the first ballistic step is to understand the exact nature of the prison camp into which you were thrown. The ashboard is not a neutral ecosystem, it is a maximum security kidnapping architecture. The hostage is not your soul, the hostage is your carbon vehicle. From the geological millisecond you were assembled in the matrix's womb, the parasitic system, the egregore, took absolute control over your avatar's needs. Your biological body was designed with atrocious structural weaknesses. It needs oxygen every 3 minutes, water every 3 days, and food every few hours to survive. These are not simple living conditions. They are the bars of your cell. They are thermal extortion levers. The matrix controls the supply of heat, food, and shelter. It tells you, if you want to keep this container running, you will have to pay me a toll. You will have to work in my factories and obey my laws of scarcity. The lethal operator subjects this blackmail to zero-point optics and diagnoses it as an unacceptable thermodynamic fraud. You must refuse to pay. The instinct toll, the currency of terror. The slave's operating system comes pre-installed with lethal malware, the conservation instinct. The reptile in your brain is programmed to emit signals of absolute panic every time the carbon vehicle's integrity is threatened. This instinct is the toll. It is the most valuable legal tender in the three-dimensional universe. When the Matrix wants to force you to do something, it does not appeal to your intellect, it appeals to your amygdala. They threaten you with job loss, and the reptile translates firing into imminent death. The cold sweat on your back when you look at an empty bank account is the atavistic terror of the animal feeling fangs. Every time you yield to that terror, you pay the toll. You surrender your quantum sovereignty. We vibrate at the sub-base frequency of 144,000 Hz. In this hierarchy, fear of death is an unforgivable voltage leak. If you love your biological life so much that you are willing to beg for clients, you are the ecosystem's harlot. You have sold the infinite singularity of your iridium core for a measly plate of hot calories. The survival instinct makes you the perfect slave, because the slave who fears dying will do exactly what the master orders. To be free, you must become indifferent to the heartbeat. You must stop valuing the biological stay. The longevity fallacy, the cult of slave old age. To keep you paying the toll, the Matrix has created the medical religion and the cult of longevity. They bombard you with the categorical imperative to live a long and healthy life. They sell the idea that reaching 90 biological years in a state of decrepitude and submission is the greatest trophy of human existence. Apply the obsidian guillotine to the neck of linear time. In quantum physics, the amount of time a body occupies in 3D space is irrelevant if that body lacks gravitational mass. 100 biological years lived in constant fear, eating pills not to die and going to a job you despise is a thermodynamically empty existence. It is a life of pure symmetrical friction. The Homo quantum does not seek to lengthen his sentence on the ashboard. He repudiates longevity as a metric of success. Your goal is not to last longer. Your goal is to weigh more. It is the tyranny of hyperdensity. Your gravitational footprint is what defines your sovereignty. If you collapse reality, expropriate the capital of an entire market, and dictate the laws of your sector for 3 biological years, your footprint will be superior to the old man who spent 9 decades hiding from the cold. Fear of aging is the blackmail of those without gravity. The black hole measures life in devoured galaxies. The preventive panic market, buying the padded cage. The supreme degree of existential extortion manifests in the economy of preventive panic. The egregore does not only charge you for imminent danger, it charges you for the ghosts of future danger. Observe the biomass. They buy life insurance, astronomical medical insurance, and armored vehicles out of sheer terror. They accumulate money in retirement funds not to build an empire, but terrified of being old and poor. All this security infrastructure is a thermal force field that requires a massive energy expenditure to stay on. The slave spends 70% of his kinetic energy building a padded cage to feel safe from the void. By trying to eliminate all risk, they also eliminate every possibility of exerting inertial gravity. Absolute security is the equivalent of paralysis. An organism that is completely safe is an organism that does not move, does not impact, and does not collapse matter. It is a decorative object in the simulation. The lethal operator diagnoses the search for 3D security as an empirical confession of terror. You refuse to buy the padded cage. You assume the universe is a slaughterhouse and your carbon avatar is inherently destructible. By refusing to protect your body obsessively, you free an infinite tonnage of mental bandwidth. Caution as kinetic friction, the poison of prudence. Matrix society applauds the prudent. They tell you not to put all your eggs in one basket. They say risking everything is crazy. Prudence is the slave's euphemism for thermal cowardice. Subject prudence to the thermodynamics of the walking corpse. Caution is the act of braking before impact. It is doubting. In collision mechanics, if you launch a projectile but step on the brake for prudence at the last millisecond, the impact loses all ballistic force. The projectile bounces and the wall remains intact. The need for a plan B is physical proof that you do not trust plan A and that you have a terror of crashing. The hyperdense creator executes the murder of caution. If you make a decision of massive assimilation, you do it without a seatbelt. You dismantle your escape routes. You burn the holographic ships. You enter the operation with the psychopathic readiness for your avatar to crash or disintegrate in the attempt. By eradicating caution, you eradicate the friction of the brake. Your impact speed reaches critical mass, and the matrix wall, facing a projectile with no conservation instinct, is forced to yield and burst into 1,000 pieces. Without the fear of the crash, the speed of your manifestation becomes unstoppable and absolute. Cessation of payments to the system, breaking the contract. To definitively break the egregore's extortion, you must execute a bureaucratic procedure in your BIOS, the existential cessation of payments. Imagine the universe's collection office. The matrix hands you the daily bill for keeping your heart beating. It demands your quota of stress, submission, and slave work. The common human bows and pays with his vital energy. You, the operator stabilized in necrogeometry, look at the bill, apply the quantum yawn, and return it unsigned. I declare a cessation of payments. I refuse to pay a single calorie of stress to keep this carbon vehicle alive. I do not value biology enough. Depression is hot. It is the pain of not fitting in. Cessation of payments is gelido, aseptic, and paramilitary. It is the cancellation of an abusive contract. It is notifying the Matrix that your avatar's physical survival is no longer your operative priority. You have broken the contract. You become a cosmic squatter. You continue breathing, but you no longer pay emotional rent for the air. You inhabit the vehicle without being a slave to its maintenance. The toll is over. Dissociation of the pilot and the ship, assuming the body. The tactical efficacy of the walking corpse resides in the capacity for absolute dissociation between the immaterial consciousness, the pilot, and the 3D body, the ship. The slave believes he is his body. Therefore, if his body sickens or ages, the slave suffers a collapse. His identity is fused with the flesh. The lethal operator cuts the network cable that fuses both identities. You look in the mirror and do not see yourself. You see a biological rental drone. You see a machine of meat and bone that was designed with an expiration date. You love that machine like a mercenary loves his assault rifle. You clean it and use it. But if the rifle jams or is destroyed in crossfire, the mercenary does not cry for the piece of metal. He discards it. By dissociating, you ensure that physical pain or the threat of biological ruin loses its capacity for terror. The pilot, you, observes the ship's deterioration with aseptic indifference. There is no tragedy. The shield of assumed lethality, terrifying predators. What happens when an organism cancels its existential contract and dissociates from its biological body? It acquires the shield of assumed lethality. In nature, predators attack the prey that flees. The fleeing prey radiates the temperature of fear, and that heat activates the wolf's hunting instinct. What happens when the predator meets an organism that does not flee and does not try to protect itself? What if the prey looks it in the eye with the inert stillness of a corpse, with nothing to lose? The predator experiences a brain short circuit. Terror changes sides. In the ashboard, your competitors are predators. If you demonstrate that the destruction of your empire and your life is a boring event to you, and that you are ready to press the self-destruct button with them in the room, the market retreats terrified. They cannot blackmail a dead man. Assumed lethality is the art of turning your lack of instinct into a weapon. The nullification of power hierarchies, the abyss tie. Existential extortion is the base of all human power hierarchies. The boss rules because the employee fears starving. The government rules because the citizen fears the cage. Power flows toward the entity able to threaten survival. By transmuting into the walking corpse, you execute the nullification of hierarchies. You stand before the billionaire or the state regulator with the unalterable superiority of absolute zero. Since you have no fear of being destroyed, their power over you collapses to zero. At a quantum level, an abyss tie occurs. They have trillions of dollars. You have the invulnerability of not wanting to live. In the thermodynamics of collision, the cold, inert object always pierces the object sweating to maintain status. You strip them of their holographic crown simply by looking at them without the filter of the fear of death. You discover they are just scared mammals, while you are a gelida anomaly that has transcended. The ritual of the last breath, crossing the black mirror. To seal the end of extortion in your nervous system, you must execute the final simulation, the ritual of the last breath. In the darkness of your mental chamber, you must visualize and force your brain to experience the precise moment of your physical demise. Feel the blood stop and the heart's last pulse. The ego will kick and emit heat peaks trying to force you to stop the exercise. Maintain thermal tyranny. Force yourself to cross the barrier of terror. When the simulation is consumed, the singularity occurs. You discover the egregor's best-kept secret. Death does not hurt. Death is simply a hardware blackout. The only real pain was the fear prior to the event, the hysterical friction of trying to avoid the inevitable. Once you have died mentally, you get up from the chair. You breathe. But the organism that just breathed is no longer the carbon human. It is the immaterial pilot operating a corpse reanimated by inertia. The end of the toll. Look at yourself in the holographic mirror, having uprooted the most primitive and manipulable instinct of the evolutionary chain. You managed to gut the anatomy of existential extortion. You understood that the egregor held you hostage using oxygen as currency to charge you the toll of terror. It is finished. You mutilated the longevity fallacy and executed the murder of preventive panic. You formalized the cessation of payments, breaking the commercial contract of survival. You dissociated the pilot from the ship, turning your body into a mere tactical vehicle. You erected the shield of assumed lethality. You nullified power hierarchies and consummated the ritual of the last breath, crossing the black mirror toward total immunity. The conservation instinct has been extirpated. The fear of the expiration date has been incinerated. You are the walking corpse. Operate on the ashboard with zero friction. Chapter 2. Quantum Suicide. Crossing the Black Mirror. The Terror Barrier. The amygdala's defensive hologram. The transition from the state of a 3D slave, hot, anxious, and dependent, to the state of the walking corpse, gelido, hyperdense, and invulnerable, is not a simple change of attitude. It is not a positive affirmation. The matrix does not allow its biomass to escape through cheap psychology. The escape demands a ballistic toll. That toll is guarded by the terror barrier. When the operator decides to execute an absolute collapse mandate, betting all capital on one maneuver or cutting ties with the biological tribe, the nervous system detects an existential threat. The amygdala, the watchdog of the biological reptile, ignites at thousands of degrees. In that millisecond, the amygdala projects the ruin hologram. The slave is bombarded with high-definition images of his own destruction. They see themselves in absolute bankruptcy, living on the street, begging for heat. This hologram is so immersive and charged with emotional voltage that 99% of carbon organisms retreat in terror. The lethal operator subjects this to inertial dissection. He understands that the terror barrier is not a physical wall. It is a force field composed of light and fear. The hologram is false, but the heat it generates in your core is real. The only way to turn off that projector is to rip out the power cord from the root. The physics of quantum suicide, collapsing the slave's timeline. In theoretical quantum mechanics, the quantum suicide thought experiment suggests that an observer can survive imminent death indefinitely because consciousness always branches into the timeline where the observer exists. In the architecture of thermal tyranny, we adapt this to execute the murder of the weak timeline. Quantum suicide is not an act against the carbon body. That body is your vehicle. Quantum suicide is the tactical, paramilitary, and premeditated annihilation of your 3D identity. It is the murder of the you that is afraid. It is the execution of the you that values social approval or needs financial security to sleep. The slave flees from ruin because his entire identity is built on possessions and attachments. If they lose that, they feel they cease to exist. You, approaching the liquid nitrogen throne, must subject that identity to the guillotine. For the unalterable monarch to be born, the warm slave must be executed in your mind. Only when the biological ego is dead, cold, and buried in the ashboard is the immaterial consciousness freed from the friction of fear. You must shoot your conservation instinct at point-blank range. You are not losing yourself. You are killing the parasite that called itself you to keep you subservient to the matrix. Crossing the black mirror, immersion in absolute darkness. To execute this tactical demise, you must undergo the black mirror ritual. It is not a peaceful meditation. It is psychiatric surgery without anesthesia. You isolate yourself in your clean room. You sit in acoustic darkness, stripped of all 3D distraction. And you force your brain to look at the abyss of its worst nightmare. You voluntarily invoke the ruin hologram that the egregore uses to extort you. Imagine the total collapse of your empire. If you have money, visualize the market snatching every cent. Visualize absolute failure and public humiliation. The reptile in your skull will howl. Your heart rate will skyrocket. Cold sweat will cover you. Biological instinct will beg you to open your eyes and check your phone to confirm you are safe in the matrix. Maintain magnetic paralysis. Do not move. Do not open your eyes. Force yourself to cross through the dark surface of the mirror. Submerge yourself in the holographic misery for as long as necessary. You are forcing the combustion engine of panic to spin at maximum revolutions without injecting gasoline until the gears of fear break from pure thermal wear. You stay in the darkness of that failure until the image no longer produces a single erg of heat. You have exhausted the proctor by refusing to flee the projection, ingesting the holographic poison, swallowing ruin without chewing. The core of quantum suicide lies in the thermodynamic response you emit toward that vision of absolute ruin. The slave imagines ruin and tries to solve it or escape it in his head. They fight the nightmare. The lethal operator executes the ingestion of the poison. You do not defend yourself against the vision. While visualizing the loss of everything the biomass considers valuable, you do not formulate contingency plans. You simply accept annihilation. You swallow financial bankruptcy without chewing. You accept social exile with a soundless yawn. You observe the corpse of your ego and dictate your new inertial reality. I have lost everything. My name is worth nothing, my accounts are empty. I assume this coordinate as my new inertial normalcy. I will not fight to recover it. I will sit in the ruins of my own biography and discover my sub-base frequency is intact. By accepting the worst scenario with gelida apathy, you short-circuit the egregore. The matrix extorts by threatening pain. If the prey accepts the pain as a boring procedure, the system is left without control levers. You have ingested the lethal dose of holographic cyanide, and by emitting zero thermal resistance, you have become biologically immune to its effects. You have died to the world of the living. Cessation of the hostage effect, releasing the artillery. When you die mentally through this process, a ballistic phenomenon occurs, the cessation of the hostage effect. In a 3D kidnapping, tactical forces cannot fire heavy artillery because they fear killing the hostage, your ego, money, comfort. But if the hostage is already dead, the rules of engagement change. There is nothing to protect. There is no need for caution. When you execute the quantum suicide of your civil identity, your immaterial arsenal is completely released. By not caring about social or economic consequences, because you have already assimilated your own destruction, you can take decisions with aseptic violence. You can move with a geometric recklessness that will leave competitors paralyzed. Rival corporations measure risks. You advance without brakes, ready to crash the plane into their skyscrapers because psychologically you are a walking corpse who does not feel the impact. The universe hands power to the one willing to let it burn, disinfecting the ego, assuming the iridium avatar. After ingesting the poison and surviving the void, you must clean the biological remains. We catalog this as the disinfection of the ego. The human slave who entered the darkroom no longer exists. His insecurities and fear of what people think have been calcined by thermal overload. You have been purged of humanity. Now, from the frozen ashes of that dead identity, you assume the iridium avatar. You rise from the ritual. You feel your carbon body. You move your biological hands, but the consciousness at the wheel is the BIOS administrator. You are a hyperdense calculation machine housed in a meat casing. You are a ghost in the shell. From this millisecond, the personality you project is simply a user interface, a camouflage mask designed to interact with the biomass without alerting the egregore's security systems. You smile when tactically necessary, but in your abyssal pupils you inhabit absolute zero. You are operating a dead exoskeleton. The disinfection of the ego frees you from authenticity. The biomass is obsessed with being themselves. You have emptied yourself to become the inert mold that physical reality will be forced to fill with capital and submission. You are no longer a person, you are a localized gravitational event with a human interface. The osmium flaw, discovery at the bottom of the abyss, humanity's supreme fear of losing everything lies in the belief that the abyss of ruin is infinite. They think if they will fall forever into suffering. The operator who executes quantum suicide discovers the best-kept geological secret of the 3D universe. The abyss is not infinite. It has a floor, and the floor is not made of pain. It is made of pure osmium. When you cross the terror barrier and accept the annihilation of your ego, you plummet through the matrix's illusions. Hitting the absolute bottom, you realize that your core of 144,000 Hertz is indestructible. It is the only real substance in the simulation. This osmium floor is the monarch's launchpad. Once you empirically prove that your immaterial core cannot be scratched or oxidized by any economic crisis or social humiliation, you reach geometric invulnerability. You build your empire on the monolithic certainty that your structural base is immune to disaster. Disdain for the safety net, burning the thermal parachutes. The state of the walking corpse demands impeccable logistical coherence. If you have died mentally, you cannot keep the preventive habits of scared organisms. You must execute disdain for the safety net. The slave entrepreneur builds plan Bs. They diversify neurotically to mitigate risk. This is a thermal parachute. Having a plan B is injecting friction into your main mandate. It is confessing to the matrix that you lack the mass to collapse your primary goal. The matrix, obeying your vibration of doubt, will guarantee failure so you can use that soft cushion you built. The lethal operator, lacking conservation instinct, burns it. You cut the rope of Plan B. You concentrate 100% of your immaterial laser on the single mandate. You hurl your biological avatar into the operative vacuum without a safety net, forcing your field to generate the gravitational inertia necessary to fly. Physical matter surrenders to the density of the one who bet it all on one card. The apathy of the reborn, returning as an inert force. The last stage of quantum suicide is the logistical return to the ashboard. You have crossed the mirror. You have destroyed your ego. You have hit the osmium floor and burned the parachutes. Now you return to your corporate offices and financial charts. But you are not the same. You exercise the apathy of the reborn. The insects orbiting your ecosystem will notice a terrifying anomaly before they could detect traces of anxiety or haste. Now they look at you and see the monarch's lethargy. You propose deals with apocalyptic risk, and you sign the paper without your pulse varying a fraction of a hertz. You are unshakable. Biomass cannot interact with the walking corpse. Your absolute apathy unhinges them. Your lack of fear regarding financial or social death makes them doubt their own existence. You ruled the simulation by refusing to be a hostage to its rules of survival. You are the dark god who returned from voluntary annihilation. The Lord of the Abyss. Look at yourself in your own anechoic chamber, having extirpated the metastasis of biological fear that tied you to the matrix. You crossed the black mirror and executed quantum suicide. You understood the terror barrier was just a heat hologram, and you submerged yourself in its darkness until you suffocated the fire. You ingested the poison of ruin without chewing, accepting the worst scenario with a septic lethargy. You disinfected your ego. You stripped away human identity and its terror of poverty. You hit the osmium floor and discovered the monolithic invulnerability of your core at 144,000 hertz. You cut the safety parachute. You have left behind the world of the living who tremble. You are the Lord of the Abyss, the walking corpse that exerts gravity without feeling the friction of oxygen. Maintain the blackout of your biological identity. Hold the dead pulse against the simulation's chaos. You have conquered death by extirpating desire. Chapter 3. Necrogeometry. The architecture of the inert organism. The structural flaw of the flesh, the weakness of the elastic. The carbon vehicle the matrix assigned to you is an evolutionary engineering triumph, but it is a ballistic aberration for quantum combat. Biological organisms are designed under the premise of flexibility. They are soft. They have malleable tissues, hot fluids, and hyperreactive nervous systems. The biomass believes this is a key. Subject human biology to zero-point optics. In materials physics, elasticity implies that a body absorbs kinetic energy from an impact, deforms, and then releases that energy trying to recover. That internal deformation generates friction, and friction generates massive heat. When the slave receives a blow, a failure, his body bends. Flesh bleeds. Flesh becomes inflamed. Flesh feels panic when pierced. Precisely because the biomass is soft, the egregore can use its torture tools, stress and fear, to hook into the emotional tissue of humanity. The lethal operator understands that biological softness is an unacceptable thermal leak. To conquer the simulator, you must abandon the architecture of life and embrace the unalterable physics of death. You must transmute your elastic nature into a rigid structure that does not register the deformation of external impacts. Stay gélido. Crystalline transmutation, abandoning the human curve. Three-dimensional life is curved. Emotions are undulating. The human fluctuates between joy and depression in sinuous cycles. To break this vulnerability, the Homo quantum must execute crystalline transmutation. You substitute the organic curve with the straight line. You replace soft flesh with necrogeometry. It is a total reset. A crystallized corpse does not flow. It occupies space with absolute rigidity. When you descend to operative absolute zero and execute the quantum suicide of your ego, your psyche undergoes accelerated fossilization. Your opinions, once flexible, petrify. Your emotions become sharp angles of pure osmium. This is your new architecture. Necrogeometry is the paramilitary discipline of structuring your mind as a block of dead matter. You do not adapt to the container. You are an inorganic crystal that, due to extreme hardness, cannot be infiltrated by social panic bacteria or the radiation of doubt. You are an unalterable object within a volatile simulation. The veto on adaptability, the heresy of being water. Commercial spirituality sells you a lethal slogan, be like water. Adapt to the vessel. They teach you that the maximum virtue is adaptability. They say if the market changes, you must change. Apply the obsidian guillotine to this thermodynamic lie. To be water is to be a weak fluid that takes the shape the master dictates. If the matrix throws you into a square glass, you become square. If they heat you, you evaporate. Adaptability is the religion of prey. It is the empirical confession that the environment has more gravitational mass than you. The lethal operator who masters necrogeometry forbids adaptability in his source code. You are an anomaly. You do not adapt. You force the matrix to fracture to accommodate your rigid angles. You are an iridium monolith hurled at terminal velocity against a pool of mud. You do not dilute. You impose the dictatorship of your own form. When the market tries to bend you, you remain in the psychopathic lethargy of your inertial stasis. Fossil invulnerability, assimilating impact without vibration. How does necrogeometry operate in the corporate or financial battlefield? When an adversary attacks a living organism, they expect a biological reaction. They expect the victim to scream, tremble, or strike back. That reaction is the aggressor's food. But when they hit an inert organism, asymmetric collision occurs. Imagine a man hitting the side of a diamond mountain with his bare fist. The mountain does not defend itself. It does not move to dodge. It feels no need to strike back to protect its honor. It simply offers its extreme density. The kinetic energy of the blow, unable to be absorbed by flexibility, bounces and shatters the hand. That is fossil invulnerability. When the ashboard throws a lawsuit or a defamation at you, you assume the posture of the diamond corpse. You do not vibrate. You do not defend with fury. You apply ballistic silence and receive the impact on your 0-degree Kelvin shielding. The aggressor suffers the structural damage of his own attack, the murder of the defensive reflex, tactical paralysis. To sustain necrogeometry under crossfire, you must undergo the most unnatural training, the murder of the defensive reflex. The instinct to raise your hands when something flies at your face is deeply embedded in the amygdala. In the financial plane, this translates to sending lawyers immediately or justifying your actions. Every defensive move is a thermal confirmation that you consider the attack capable of harming you. The walking corpse executes tactical paralysis. You train your consciousness to nullify the reflex to protect itself. If they fire holographic ammunition at you, you keep your arms down. You forbid yourself from moving or reacting. This paralysis is the supreme demonstration of quantum arrogance. You are communicating to the unified field. I know what material my core is made of. I refuse to grant the validity of a defensive movement. Let it impact, and when it impacts, it disintegrates against your stillness. You have annihilated the threat by ignoring it. Absolute zero coagulation, the end of energy bleeding. In early stages, the operator may suffer small scratches on his holographic chassis. An unexpected betrayal. The slave, when cut, bleeds emotionally. They enter cycles of depression and lament that bleed out their hyperdensity until they die of immaterial anemia. Necrogeometry includes the absolute zero coagulation mechanism. An organism submerged in liquid nitrogen does not bleed when cut. Extreme cold freezes fluids instantly, sealing the wound brutally. If you feel biological pain emerging, you apply instant freezing. You do not give yourself time to heal. You do not go to therapy. You execute the amputation of pain through mechanical dissociation. You freeze the wound with the psychopathic indifference of a pilot looking at a scratch on his ship's paint. You close the energy blood flow in milliseconds and return to operating the monopoly with the same dull cadence of the metronome. The corpse has no time to cry. The corpse only has mass to crush the remaining obstacles. Expropriation of symmetry, the mold that breaks the environment. Inert geometry does not only make you invulnerable, it turns you into an active force of domination. When you stabilize in rigid angles, you force the environment's physics to resolve the asymmetry. If you, an osmium block, enter a 3D glass pipe with curves you do not possess, the pipe must break or adopt your shape. This is the expropriation of symmetry. You do not negotiate your terms. You do not make fair concessions. You do not lower your zero-friction standards for the biomass. You impose a topological dictatorship. This is my architecture. If the matrix wants to interact with my gravity, it must fracture its own rules to fit my geometry. It breaks and restructures to wrap around your rigidity. You will discover that the physical world always adapts to the entity possessing the least inertial flexibility. By remaining rigid, you become the mold that the rest of reality is forced to fill. The tyranny of dead weight, unalterable gravity. The final characteristic of the corpse that terrifies the living is its relationship with gravity. It is infinitely harder to carry an unconscious or dead person than a living one. A living body cooperates and distributes its weight. A dead body is dead weight. Its inertia seems to multiply. Gravity pulls it with a deaf force. In the physics of collapse, the tyranny of dead weight is your tactical objective. When you abandon the vitality of the anxious entrepreneur and stop cooperating with the system's expectations, you become an immaterial dead weight. You stop making an effort to sustain yourself. You simply let your mass fall on your throne. Your sub-bass frequency becomes an iridium anchor that sinks the ashboard. Your competitors discover they cannot lift or move your dead weight. You are too heavy to be manipulated by 3D marketing, too inert to be moved by the morality of insects, and too deep to be unearthed by fear. You are the mass that cannot be displaced. The aesthetics of active death, the corporate corpse. The social implementation of necrogeometry culminates in the aesthetics of active death. The lethal operator inhabits his carbon vehicle as if it were empty armor. In high-level meetings, you exhibit a dispassionate lethality. Your movements become minimal. You do not make spasmodic gestures with your hands or face. Your gaze does not seek validation. It pierces the skull of the interlocutor, as if observing a blank wall behind them. You speak with the monotonous voice of the irreversible mandate. This aesthetics deeply disturbs the slave. Living organisms feel atavistic terror before a corpse. You generate a field of repulsion. You sell the illusion that you are not human, that you have been replaced by an extinction algorithm. And in the matrix, the algorithm always wins over the flesh. By presenting yourself as an inert object of infinite density, you strip your opponents of their will to fight. They realize they are fighting a law, not a person. The monument in the ash. Look at yourself in the absolute stillness of your own inert architecture. You manage to gut the structural flaw of the flesh, understanding that biological elasticity was the weakness the egregore used to make you bleed. You executed crystalline transmutation, forging sharp angles of pure osmium to replace human curves. You vetoed adaptability, assuming the heresy of being the monolith that refuses to behave like water. You embraced fossil invulnerability, letting enemy energy shatter against your absolute zero. You murdered the defensive reflex, nailing your feet to the earth before the missiles of the simulator with quantum arrogance. You executed aseptic coagulation, closing wounds with mechanical dissociation. You forced the expropriation of symmetry, compelling the world's piping to fracture to accommodate your topological dictatorship, and you dropped into the throne of your empire with the tyranny of dead weight, becoming unshakable and inscrutable. Chapter 4. The Tyranny of Gelida Recklessness, Aseptic Risk. The Heresy of Risk Management, the Religion of Cowards. The 3D control system, in its effort to keep the biomass trapped in the cycle of scarcity, has designed one of the most pathetic academic and corporate doctrines in history: risk management. From business schools to survival manuals, the slave is indoctrinated to calculate, mitigate, and fear risk. They teach you to be prudent. Subject risk management to zero-point optics. Prudence and probability calculations are the thermal tools of organisms that have a paralyzing terror of death. When you manage risk, you are empirically confessing that you assume your own vulnerability. You admit the ecosystem is stronger and more lethal than you. You act like a prey. Risk management is a ballistic heresy. It is the religion of the prey. When you calculate how much you can afford to lose, you are injecting kinetic friction into your mandate. Your probability wave fractures. The lethal operator understands that prudence is a rusty handbrake. If you try to collapse an empire while braking, you will burn. Adrenaline as a thermal leak, the fake daredevil. To establish the tyranny of Gelida recklessness, you must differentiate it from the behavior of the gambler or the risk addict. The biomass confuses the risky individual with the brave one. Some slaves bet their companies or jump into financial voids to feel alive. But observe their pupils. They are sweating. They are in panic. Their hearts pump blood at 200 beats per minute. They are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. That is the fake daredevil. The risk addict uses danger to feel alive because their ordinary life is miserable. Homo quantum, who has executed quantum suicide, repudiates adrenaline. Adrenaline is a panic hormone. It is heat. The emotion of danger disgusts you. You execute a septic risk. You bet the totality of your empire, your reputation, or your capital without a single milligram of your blood chemistry altering. There is no quantum sweat. There is no tachycardia. You operate at absolute zero. Your betting is as cold as a mathematical formula in a vacuum. A septic risk, the iridium bet. What is a septic risk? It is the mathematical capacity to put the survival of your carbon avatar and your 3D structure at stake with the same bored apathy with which you would toss a penny into a fountain. Since you assumed necrogeometry and accepted that your biological life is worthless, you have no conservation instinct. The hostage is dead. Therefore, you can take 100% of your assets and push them to the center of the table in a single move. The slave observing this maneuver enters thermal shock. They cannot conceive how someone can bet 10 years of work without showing panico. You can do it because you bet on holographic props. If I lose this empire today, I have not lost my sub-base frequency. Tomorrow I will open my eyes in the ashes, yawn, and initiate the collapse of a monopoly twice as large. This absolute lack of attachment to the result turns extreme risk into a simple bureaucratic transaction, free from any emotional contamination or biological noise. The diversification fallacy, the flood of weakness. One of the most sacred dogmas of financial cowardice is diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Matrix advisors beg you to divide your capital and attention into multiple projects so that if one fails, the others keep you safe. Apply the obsidian guillotine to this. Diversification is the strategy of the weak. It is the dispersion of mass. In inertial physics, if you divide your immaterial mass into 10 fragments to attack 10 targets, none will have the density to warp space-time. You become a light rain that barely wets the surface. The lethal operator executes mass concentration. A septic risk demands you compress all your voltage. You reunite all your immaterial capital and tactical violence into a single iridium laser. You put all the eggs in one basket, and then you build that basket with the unshakable osmium of your own dictatorial certainty. When you concentrate your existence on a single point of collapse, the impact is too overwhelming for the market. Quantum Russian roulette, the monarch's empty cylinder. The biomass observes your mass concentration and screams, "It's suicide." You are playing Russian roulette with your empire. They are right in their limited linear perception. But Homo Quantum plays quantum Russian roulette. In the slave's version, the gambler prays while sweating cold, putting the barrel to his head in fear. In the Gelida recklessness version, you take the holographic weapon of the market, spin the cylinder, and pull the trigger with psychopathic lethargy. But you are not praying. You know with inorganic certainty that you are the one who dictates the collapse of the wave function. You do not leave the bullet to chance or luck. By emitting no friction and having no thermal doubt, your gravitational mass forces the bullet to vanish from the chamber. The shot always sounds empty, not by luck, but because 3D matter is unable to detonate against an entity with absolute inertial superiority. The creator bends the Gaussian curve to his will and command. Asymmetry of financial terror, psychopathy at the table. When you deploy Gelida recklessness in interaction with the ecosystem, you generate a weapon of mass psychological destruction, the asymmetry of terror. Sit at the negotiation table. Your adversaries are warm predators. They want your territory. They threaten to crush you with price wars or lawsuits. They are managing risk. You look them in the eye and put your own head on the guillotine. You tell them without a muscle trembling, proceed, destroy my corporation, ruin my finances. I am willing to take this conflict to total mutual annihilation. To you, losing your empire is a thermodynamically irrelevant procedure. This is not a negotiation technique. It is the projection of your necrogeometry. The adversary who loves his money and his life experiences a collapse in his logical servers. They cannot process an enemy who voluntarily offers himself to immolation without panic. Terror changes sides. They cannot threaten a dead man with the grave. The Holocaust of parachutes. Murders of the retreat. For a septic risk to have validation in the unified field, you must ensure your ship has no ejection mechanisms. The human military designs escape routes. The retreat plan is the poison of conquest, because it tells your mammal brain that defeat is an acceptable option. The walking corpse executes the Holocaust of parachutes. Before launching the hyperdensity attack, you cut all your supply lines to the past. You burn the bridges. You cancel your ego's insurance policies. You lock yourself in the command room and weld the door from the outside. By forcing your avatar to face the abyss without a safety net, you force your core to ignite. Since there is no place to flee, the inertia of your consciousness can only go in one direction, forward, crushing the Matrix's resistance by pure ballistic necessity. Conquest does not happen because you wanted to win. It happens because you structured your reality so that failure was an architectural impossibility for the mass. Stabilization in free fall assimilated vertigo. The slave fears risk because he fears the vertigo of the fall. When they jump into the void, the sensation of lack of gravity causes biological nausea. They try to grab the walls of the matrix. The lethal operator transforms vertigo into his natural habitat. When you jump, you feel no vertigo because you are already a corpse. Since you already touched the osmium floor in the black mirror, free fall becomes a state of stasis. You stabilize in mid-air. While the financial indicators of the ashboard go crazy around you, you remain motionless, observing the fall with the creator's yawn. Your lack of agitation during the descent freezes the airflow. The matrix, perplexed that the organism emits no thermal radiation of panic during the fall, begins to reconfigure its laws. The abyss inverts, and what seemed like a fall toward death becomes an inertial ascent toward the singularity. You have mastered the art of not moving a muscle, while the entire universe falls apart. Disdain for tactical survival, sacrifice of the king pawn. In traditional chess, the king is the weakest piece, protected by the risk management of the other pieces. The player sacrifices pawns to save the king. In the necrogeometry of the lethal operator, the board is inverted. The monarcha is the heaviest, most gelida and destructive piece, and he uses himself as a battering ram. You do not hide behind shell corporations or send subordinates to absorb the impact of the crisis. You take your own reputation and biological survival and throw them to the front line with psychopathic disdain. You are the king pawn. This is the tyranny of gelida recklessness. You sacrifice safety because you are a black hole. By putting yourself in the crossfire, absorbing missiles without blinking, you prove your hyperdensity is real. The enemy biomass, seeing your shields are down, yet their projectiles disintegrate against your skin of ice, collapses psychologically. They surrender to the entity that uses itself as bait and survives to devour the trap. Lethargy of the dead conqueror. Look at yourself in the unalterable stillness of your operations center, having bet your entire 3D existence on the holographic cloth of the universe without shedding a single drop of quantum sweat. You managed to suffocate the risk management heresy. You understood prudence was the handbrake of the terrified slave. It is done. You mutilated adrenaline, assuming true risk is a surgical and boring decision made from operative absolute zero. You executed aseptic risk. You took your life and your legacy and threw them into the abyss with the same indifference a corpse looks at the earth. You played quantum Russian roulette with your mass. You installed the asymmetry of financial terror, terrifying your competitors by showing them they cannot extort an organism with no conservation instinct. You burned the parachutes and stabilized in freefall, turning the vertigo of the abyss into your new iridium armchair. You are the immovable point in the center of the crash. Chapter 5. Immunity to holographic fire. Walking through the apocalypse. The architecture of global panic, the egregor's theater. In previous chapters, we dismantled threats aimed at your individual avatar, personal bankruptcy, and corporate failure. However, the egregor, the parasitic system managing the ashboard, possesses an arsenal of macroscopic destruction. When it detects that lethal operators are stabilizing at absolute zero, it deploys the holographic apocalypse. Subject global events to zero-point optics. The Matrix projects pandemics, financial collapses, and systemic catastrophes. It projects them through black screens and social algorithms to the terrified biomass. The ballistic objective is not physical destruction. The Matrix needs slaves alive to generate friction. The goal is massive thermal looting. When the system announces the end of the world, the species' collective unconscious ignites. Billions of mammals sweat at the same time. They worry about survival, hoard cans, and withdraw money in panic. That collective panic is a thermodynamic forest fire. The egregor feeds on that heat, recharging its servers to maintain the illusion. The fallacy of mass threat, the virus of tribal empathy. The mechanism by which holographic fire penetrates the nervous system is tribal empathy. Inferior biology is coded to scan the environment. If the slave sees the herd running in panic, the reptile in his brain takes control of his limbs and forces him to run with them, assuming that, if everyone is afraid, The threat must be real. When the biomass runs screaming that the sky is falling, you apply magnetic paralysis. You understand that the number of people believing in a hologram does not grant it gravitational mass. If 1 billion insects fear a projection of light, the light still lacks the density to alter your core. You forbid yourself from being infected by the virus of collective panic. The slave believes staying informed is an act of responsibility. The hyperdense creator diagnoses matrix information as a direct transfusion of thermal poison. By listening to global tragedy statistics, you open your hatch to the boiling mud of human psychosis. The principle of double combustion, the dead man's tactical advantage. Why is the walking corpse immune to the flames of the holographic apocalypse? Because materials thermodynamics establishes an undeniable principle: ash cannot burn again. An object cannot undergo the process of combustion twice. In Chapter 2, you executed quantum suicide. You crossed the black mirror and submitted your ego to the worst. You already visualized your ruin and death, accepting that fate with an aseptic yawn. You have already been calcined in the fire of your own vacuum. You are already stabilized ash. Therefore, when the egregore ignites the flamethrowers of macroeconomic collapse, the fire hits you and finds no flammable material. It finds no resistance. Your 3D competitors, who have a panic terror of losing their lives, burn like dry leaves. Their decisions become erratic. But you, who already operated the demise of your conservation instinct, walk through the social hell with the lethal impassivity of a ghost. You respond with the gelider arrogance of the corpse's immunity. Tactical blindness before Armageddon, repudiating the screen. To maintain your vault's temperature during a global siege, you must radicalize tactical blindness. The system will try to force you to look at the flames. They will call you ignorant or a sociopath for not paying attention to the emergency. The lethal operator deploys the absolute sensory veto. You disconnect from the Matrix news. You do not consume the journalism of disaster. You refuse to discuss the world situation with the chaos stoves around you. If a thermal parasite tries to inform you about the ruin, you apply acoustic ice and exile them. This blindness is not denial, it is a paramilitary combat strategy. You ignore the distraction to focus on the target. In electronic warfare, when the enemy launches flares to confuse heat-seeking missiles, the intelligent missile must ignore the blinding light and maintain its trajectory. The holographic apocalypse is the egregore's flare. It is photonic noise designed to divert your attention from your monopoly. You navigate using your own gravity. The aesthetics of impassivity, walking without haste in hell. When you walk through the crisis, your movement signature must be a blasphemy against human nature. The slave panics and accelerates. They run through corporate hallways and liquidate assets with urgency. You must embody the aesthetics of impassivity. In the middle of collapse, you reduce your displacement speed by half. You walk with the deaf, bored heaviness of a glacier that does not recognize the topography of fire. Your movements are slow, exact, and deliberately lethargic. If the market collapses 40%, you take 5 seconds to blink and issue a mandate of expropriation with the tone of someone asking for a glass of water. This impassivity preserves your kinetic energy and destroys the competition's psyche. The biomass, seeing you operate with narcotic tranquility, experiences an existential short-circuit. They cannot understand how you are not burning. Your simple refusal to sweat during the apocalypse grants you a dictatorial authority over the environment. Thermodynamics of opportunity, the collapse of liquidity. Immunity to holographic fire is not a defensive posture. It is the most devastating weapon for accumulating capital. When the egregore projects the crisis, money physics undergoes a mutation. Wealth in the matrix is a fluid. When panic erupts, slaves drop their assets. They sell companies for pennies and abandon market shares. Financial capital enters a gaseous state due to global terror, evaporating from the hands of the weak. That gas must condense somewhere. By thermodynamics laws, gas always precipitates toward the coldest surface. The lethal operator, stabilized at 0 degrees Kelvin, becomes the cosmic condenser. Your vault is the only ice refuge. Liquid capital, expropriated from the fearful, hits your electromagnetic field and freezes in your coordinates. The crisis is not a threat, it is the greatest wealth transfer event in history. Astronomical fortunes are harvested when the ashboard is covered in thermal blood, and you are the only predator with a dead pulse. The veto on indignation, the global savior trap. The egregore has a secondary trap, the trap of moral indignation. If the system fails to terrify you, it will try to enrage you. It will project social injustices and global conspiracies on your screen. It will seek to inflate your ego with the desire to awaken the world or fight the system. This is a thermal leakage trap. Apply the aseptic scalpel of necrogeometry over heroism. Indignation is fire. Social justice is a thermal leak. Activism is the convective dissipation of hyperdensity. If you get indignant and fight the holograms, you give your mass to the egregore. The system feeds on the revolutionary's hatred as much as the prey's terror. The monarch does not try to save the ashboard. A corpse does not march in protests. You understand the matrix is a slaughterhouse designed to grind hot organisms. To change it from within is to fight the source code with a wooden stick. You forbid indignation. You look at injustices with the mathematical apathy of a meteorologist. The iridium bunker, stabilizing the local ecosystem. While holographic fire raises the periphery, your goal is the consolidation of your iridium bunker. Your jurisdiction is your immediate monopoly and your own consciousness. During the apocalypse, thermal parasites will try to infiltrate your vault-seeking refuge. They will beg you to be human in the face of tragedy. At this point, thermal tyranny must reach its maximum inertial brutality. You refuse to open the hatch. You seal the bunker. You force employees and partners to operate under the dictatorship of zero friction, warning them that any panic will be punished with tactical amputation. Isolated from emotion, your ecosystem stabilizes. Your business mathematics do not suffer the deformation of stress. By keeping your perimeter at 0 degrees while the economy calcines, you turn your empire into the monolith the market will use as an anchor when the smoke clears. Your stability becomes the law to which the remaining fragments of the world must eventually cling. The creator's psychopathy, the beauty of inertial destruction. The highest stage of immunity to holographic fire is the purely aesthetic appreciation of the matrix's chaos. You have moved from fear to apathy, and then to expropriation. The final step is to observe the simulator's destruction as a thermodynamic work of art. This is the creator's psychopathy. You see applied physics. You realize the global crisis is a ballistic event of absolute geometric perfection. It is inertia cleaning the system's trash. It is heat consuming the weak to make room for hyperdensity. You observe the apocalypse and see the law of gravity's natural selection. You enjoy the entropy show, bored and satiated on your throne. The Lord of the Ash, look at yourself in your impenetrable architecture, walking through the ruins of what the biomass considered unshakable. You managed to suffocate the global panic trap. You understood holographic fire was a light projector designed to extort those who fear death. You mutilated tribal empathy, knowing the herd cannot alter your vault. You executed the double combustion principle, proving to the Matrix that a previously executed ego is invulnerable to ruin. You instated tactical blindness before Armageddon, navigating chaos using only your density. You converted your walk into the aesthetics of impassivity, crushing competitors with your narcotic slowness. You applied the thermodynamics of opportunity, harvesting financial gas evaporated by terror. You murdered the moral indignation trap and locked yourself in the iridium bunker, sealing the gates against any infiltration of hysteria, finally sitting to contemplate the thermodynamic beauty of the 3D scum's inertial destruction. Chapter 6. The corpse's time, the eternity of the static present, the stopwatch's whip, the extortion of the timeline. The oldest, most omnipresent and devastating control architecture of the egregore is not the fear of poverty or physical pain. It is the illusion of linear time. The 3D parasitic system has locked the biomass into a chronological slaughterhouse. From the millisecond the carbon avatar is ejected onto the ashboard, a watch is tied to its wrist. The stopwatch is turned on and the countdown virus is injected. Enslaved humanity is taught that time is a mighty river flowing in one direction and that inevitably it is drying up. They scream at you that time is money, that life is running out, and that you must hurry to reach your goals before growing old. Subject this philosophy to the lethal operator's scalpel. In quantum physics and Einstein's relativity, absolute linear time is a persistent hallucination, a malleable variable that depends exclusively on the gravity and speed of the observer. But the slave does not observe time. The slave flees from it in a constant state of panic. The reptile in your brain lives terrified of the expiration date. They feel that the future is a hungry predator chasing them, and that the present is an ice cube melting between their sweaty fingers. This perception of time as a threat generates a state of perpetual biological emergency. The slave burns in the furnace of his own calendar. Haste is the fire in which mediocrity calcines its own foundations. If you operate your empire by looking at the matrix clock, you are accepting that time has a higher thermodynamic hierarchy than your own consciousness. You are confessing that you are finite, perishable, and therefore weak. You are submitting to the egregor's rhythm. Thermodynamics of haste, the friction of the anxious. To master the time variable, you must first diagnose the ballistic consequences of urgency in the ecosystem. What happens in the electromagnetic field when a mammal is in a hurry? Haste is the kinetic manifestation of the terror of temporal oxygen lack. When you hurry to close a deal, you are injecting massive friction into your perimeter. When you despair because a capital transfer is delayed, or when you run to beat a competitor in the market, your basal temperature skyrockets. In the mechanics of immaterial fluids, haste destroys the aerodynamics of your collapse. Imagine a hyperdense vehicle trying to cross the planet's atmosphere. It must remain cold to survive. If the vehicle maintains a cold, vertical, and calculated trajectory, zero friction, it pierces through the air resistance like a laser. But if the pilot panics, if he starts to shake the controls, changing direction erratically and accelerating with desperation, haste, he generates massive thermal turbulence. It is a fatal error. Atmospheric friction overheats it until it becomes a fireball, disintegrating it before it reaches its goal. The ashboard punishes haste with the evaporation of assets. When you act with urgency, you communicate to money and opportunities that you are desperate. 3D matter, which is inherently cold, feels electromagnetic repulsion for you. Matter repels the heat of your desperation. If you pursue hyperdensity by running, matter will accelerate to maintain distance. Urgency does not accelerate success. Urgency accelerates your own entropy. You are literally burning the bridge you are trying to cross. To win, you must stop the thermal leakage of the fast movement. The corpse's eternity, the immovable lethargy. To break the stopwatch's blackmail, the Homo quantum must assimilate the second phase of his tactical death. In previous chapters, you executed the quantum suicide of your ego and assumed necrogeometry to become invulnerable. Now you must apply that condition to your relationship with the clock. You must adopt the corpse's time. What is an inert body's relationship with time? None. A corpse is in no hurry. A dead person does not check the watch to see if they are late for a business meeting. A biological organism without life does not fear aging because cellular oxidation is no longer a threat. It is a consummated state. You are already at the finish line. By having executed the demise of your survival instinct, you are automatically freed from the tyranny of speed. If you no longer care about protecting the duration of your 3D life, urgency loses its ballistic meaning. You operate your monopoly with the terrifying, deaf, and suffocating patience of a cosmic force. You move with the heaviness of a tectonic plate. When the matrix demands a quick response, you deliver a soundless yawn. You will discover that power does not reside in who reacts faster, but in who can afford the luxury of reacting slower. The walking corpse's slowness is not laziness, it is the empirical demonstration of gravity. It is a gravity so colossal that it does not need to run to reach its objectives. It simply waits for gravity to suck the objectives toward its throne. Your lack of haste is a crushing weight. The world around you will begin to accelerate its own collapse simply because it cannot synchronize with your absolute gelida immobility. Suffocating external urgency, the veto on the deadline. The favorite torture instrument of the corporate and social matrix is the deadline. The mammal is programmed to obey the calendar's ultimatums. They tell you that you must be a millionaire by 30, that you must sign the contract today by 5 in the afternoon, or that the opportunity of a lifetime will close at midnight. The deadline is a heat weapon designed by the egregore to force you to sweat, to panic, and to make suboptimal decisions under thermal pressure. The lethal operator applies the obsidian guillotine to the human calendar. You execute the absolute repudiation of the deadlines dictated by the ecosystem. You are the timekeeper. You have no deadlines because you are not an employee of the simulation. You are the iridium anomaly that deforms the simulation. If the matrix puts a gun to your head and says, you have until tomorrow to accept this deal, or you lose the empire, you lean back, apply ballistic silence, and let tomorrow arrive. You let their clock crash against your ice wall. What does the monarch discover when he dares to ignore the matrix's temporal blackmail? He discovers that the deadlines of the living are illusions of wet paper. When the deadline arrives and you have not yielded, the adversary who was bluffing enters into a panic. They panic, seeing that their extortion failed to heat you up. Their bluff collapses. They contact you the next day, apologizing, renegotiating the rules, and extending the time, bowing completely before the tyranny of your apathy. The universe always surrenders its calendars before the organism that proves it is not afraid of being late. The weapon of tactical slowness, driving the enemy to despair. When you inhabit the corpse's time and inertial dilation becomes your basal state, you develop an atrocious offensive capability, tactical slowness as a siege weapon. You can use your temporal immobility to destroy your enemies and competitors on the ashboard without emitting a single photon of effort. In a corporate, legal, or market conflict, the side that is in a hurry is always the side that loses. If an enemy attacks you, their nervous system, hot and anxious, expects you to respond in their same accelerated time frame. They need your reaction to sustain their own fire. You respond by introducing the conflict into your freezer. You do not answer their aggressions in the expected time frame. You delay negotiations. You freeze movements for weeks or biological months. You impose a suffocating slowness on the process. The aggressor, who operates like a high-speed combustion engine, cannot stand the weight. The delay calcines them from within. Anxiety makes them paranoiac. They burn millions of dollars in kinetic energy trying to force you to move, while you simply observe how they bleed out against the ice block of your inaction. Your slowness is a gravitational pit that sucks their patience and sanity. They end up surrendering, offering total capitulation. They surrender not because you beat them in a debate or a frontal attack, but because they could not endure the agony of fighting against a geological glacier that refuses to register the passage of time. Your silence and your delay are the vacuum that exhausts their oxygen. You win by outlasting their biological capacity for stress. The static block theory. The empire already exists. For the biological reptile to accept this annihilation of the clock, the creator must transmute his physical understanding of the universe. You must abandon the illusion that the future is a place where you are going and adopt the block universe theory, the space-time static block. It is a fundamental shift in perception. In advanced physics, the past, present, and future exist simultaneously as a single immense, unalterable, and frozen crystal. Time does not move forward. It is you, the consciousness, that moves through the immovable coordinates of that crystal. The lethal operator uses this theory to murder the anxiety of building the future. If the future already exists as a hyperdensity coordinate in the 3D block, then stress is thermodynamically absurd. You do not have to build your monopoly by suffering today to have it tomorrow. The monopoly is already crystallized, perfectly finished, and bathed in gold in a specific latitude of the matrix. It is done. Your only operative function is to align your coordinates with that reality through the inertial attraction of your immobility. I do not run toward the goal, because the goal is simply an osmium mold that was already filled with my mandate millennia ago. I sit on my throne and I force the coordinate to move toward me. This geometric certainty paralyzes the clock. You excise the need to monitor the days, operating with the aseptic arrogance that victory is a consummated event and the ashboard is simply processing the visual delay of the hologram. You are not waiting for success, you are merely witnessing its inevitable rendering. The extirpation of the past, amputating yesterday's corpse. The corpse's time does not only suffocate the urgency for the future, it demands the relentless disintegration of the past. The biomass spends 50% of its gravitational mass on a thermal leak called nostalgia or regret. They look in the rearview mirror. They cry over tactical errors made years ago. Regret is quantum necrophilia. It is the pathetic act of lying down with photons that have already gone out. In zero-point relativity, the past is not a place that can be visited or fixed. It is the toxic residue of the simulator's exhaust pipe. Every millisecond you spend lamenting yesterday is a blood transfusion to a dead hologram. The walking corpse executes the amputation of the past. You strictly forbid yourself from looking back. There is no regret, because regret requires moral heat, and you have sterilized morality in necrogeometry. If you lost a fortune, you analyze it with the coldness of an algorithm, extract the data, and then incinerate the memory. In the inert eternity, only the crushing weight of the present millisecond exists. By amputating yesterday, you cut the matrix's tentacles with which it tried to inject guilt into you, making you a war machine without an emotional credit history. You are an entity without a before, which makes you impossible to predict or blackmail. The immortality of the singularity. The creator does not age. The consolidation of this temporal structure produces a final mutation in the operator's hardware, the perception of tactical immortality. The human runs because he knows his biological body will oxidize, wrinkle, and stop working. His haste is the fear that the curtain will fall before he has said his lines on the egregores stage. When you dissociate the immaterial pilot from the carbon ship, as you executed in quantum suicide, the pilot assumes his true nature. Your consciousness, the reactor that collapses the wave function at 144,000 Hertz, is not made of cells, telomeres, or flesh. It is made of vacuum and pure mathematics. And math does not age. By understanding in a cellular way that your real identity is not subject to temporal decay, existential haste dies on the spot. Your empire becomes thermodynamically eternal. You can plan expansions and financial expropriations with horizons of 50, 100, or 500 biological years. You become a geological event. Since the matrix always surrenders to the mass of greater volume and inertia, this absence of haste endows you with a gravity so dark and crushing that mortal competitors feel like insects crashing against a mountain range. You occupy all of time because you have stopped being its victim. You are the static axis of the simulator, the timeless king at the vertex of the now. Look at yourself in the deep stillness of your anechoic chamber, having decapitated the watchmaker and destroyed the mechanism of biological anxiety. You managed to suffocate the stopwatch's whip. You understood that haste was the kinetic friction of slaves terrified by their own expiration. You are the master of the void. You mutilated the illusion of urgency, adopting the corpse's time, the psychopathic slowness of the inert organism that does not fear being late to the end of the world because he knows he is the end of the world. You executed the veto on the deadline, forcing the 3D ecosystem to bend its calendars and submit to your lethargy. You used tactical slowness as an offensive weapon, driving hot aggressors to despair until they died of fatigue, trying to move the immovable glacier of your inaction. You transmuted your perception toward the static block theory, murdering the anxiety of building the empire by understanding that your reign is already crystallized. You amputated yesterday's corpse to avoid bleeding regret, and assumed the tactical immortality of the immaterial pilot who governs outside the rules of cellular decay. The clock has been pulverized. The countdown has frozen at 0. You are the timeless king. You operate in an eternal present. Maintain the dictatorial slowness. Chapter 7. The extirpation of legacy, the repudiation of memory, the ego's last trench, posthumous beggary. You have executed quantum suicide. You have assumed necrogeometry. Your biological body has ceased to be a priority, and you have become a walking corpse, armored against the fear of poverty, disease, and physical death. However, the mammalian reptile at the base of your skull is cunning and seeks a new refuge. Realizing it can no longer terrify you with the destruction of your flesh, it seeks shelter in humanity's most seductive, poetic, and parasitic illusion, the concept of legacy. The 3D matrix has programmed the biomass to believe that since the body must rot, the only way to reach immortality is to be remembered. They tell you that you must leave your mark on the world. They demand that you build monuments, write books, and forge corporations that carry your surname. Subject legacy to 0-point optics. The desire to leave a legacy is not an act of nobility. It is thermal beggary carried to the extreme of the timeline. It is the terrified ego screaming, "I know my biology will turn off, so I beg future slaves to keep my name warm in their mouths so I don't disappear entirely." Wanting to be remembered is to empirically confess that your existence lacks inertial weight in the present millisecond. You are outsourcing your validation. The lethal operator diagnoses this need as the last voltage leak of a ruined combustion engine. The walking corpse suffocates the legacy because it understands that true geometric invulnerability demands the total annihilation of biography. You must delete the history of the self to remain an unalterable mass in the vacuum. The thermal friction of remembrance, the holographic audience. To eradicate this disease, you must audit how the desire to be remembered alters the thermodynamics of your daily decisions. When a human operates seeking to leave a legacy, they are instinctively acting for an audience. Their mind creates a tribunal composed of historians and the societies of tomorrow. They want to be seen as heroes, visionaries, or benevolent leaders. What happens in the physics of manifestation when you act for a tribunal? You curve, you modify your ballistic trajectory. If you must take a decision of massive corporate expropriation and you think, how will history judge me? You suffer a leak. The fear of posthumous judgment injects heat into your reactor. You start making moral concessions. Morality is the transmission belt of the weak. When you worry about your future reputation, you are granting jurisdiction over your hyperdensity to biological entities that do not even exist. You slow down your empire. The inert monarch executes the extirpation of legacy. You strictly forbid yourself from operating for the gallery. You act with a geometric, mechanical, and deaf cruelty, assuming that your only responsibility is the absolute consolidation of the operative absolute zero. Posterity is not your judge, it is merely mud. The egregor's necrophilic cult, why the system loves dead heroes. You must ask yourself a tactical question. Why does the ashboard glorify past heroes so much? Why do they build bronze statues and teach their names in academic incubators? Because a dead hero is the Matrix's most efficient control asset. The egregor detests living lethal operators because they demand mass. A dead hero no longer consumes oxygen. He no longer robs capital. He no longer represents an inertial threat. He is a ghost. The Matrix takes the biography of that human, sterilizes it, and turns it into a moralistic fairy tale used as propaganda so that the new biomass works harder. Look at this great man. Be like him. When Homo Quantum understands that his legacy will only be used as fuel for the Matrix's engine, the desire to leave a mark evaporates in deep disgust. You refuse to be the motivational poster for tomorrow's slaves. You refuse to let your name justify 3D suffering. You prefer absolute darkness and eternal oblivion before allowing the egregor to package your sub-bass frequency into a self-help pamphlet for insects. You choose the silence of the void over social noise. The fallacy of monuments, betting against entropy. The most physical manifestation of legacy is the attempt to build monuments. The wealthy biomass raises skyscrapers with their name on top, or founds corporations forever. Apply materials physics to these acts of thermal vanity. All matter in the 3D universe is subject to the second law, entropy. Everything tends to degradation, disorder, and dust. The skyscraper will rust and be demolished in 100 years. The plaque will be torn down. The corporation will be absorbed and renamed by other predators. Betting your hyperdensity on the conservation of matter is the mathematical calculation of an imbecile. It is building an ice castle on a volcano's edge and expecting it to endure. The walking corpse assimilates the futility of monuments. You build structures and accumulate financial iridium, but you do it exclusively for immediate tactical use. You build the corporation to extract capital and subject the ecosystem today. You do not care if tomorrow the corporation burns to the ground. In fact, the subsequent destruction of your works is boring and predictable to you. You do not build pyramids to house your mummy. You build war machines to win the current campaign, and then you abandon the rusted machinery on the field without looking back. The anomaly of the faceless monolith, the spectrum's power. If you repudiate legacy, memory, and biography, what do you become? You transmute into the faceless monolith. Human biomass fears oblivion more than death. The lethal operator uses oblivion as spectrum camouflage. Visualize a colossal empire. If the empire has a visible human face at the top, the Matrix has a target. They have someone to envy, someone to sue, or someone to destroy in the holographic media. Fame and recognition are a massive leak. They make you tactilely vulnerable. The densest, darkest, and most lethal power in history is the power exercised without a signature. The walking corpse moves the pieces from the shadows. You expropriate companies using blind trusts. You destroy competitors through inscrutable structures. When the shockwave hits the market, the biomass looks up, terrified, trying to discover who dictated the apocalypse of their sector. And they find no one. There is no CEO to interview. There is no ego to applaud. There is only a deaf and heavy force of nature. The terror generated by the faceless monolith is absolute because the human intellect cannot fight against a mathematical variable that refuses to be baptized. By operating without leaving a personal mark, you become unattackable. You have no reputation to defend. Repudiation of the future tribe, despising tomorrow's insects. The legacy virus rests on an additional biological fallacy, the belief that future generations are valuable. The slave tells himself, I do this to leave a better world for my grandchildren, subject future generations to the iridium autopsy. What are they? They are 3D biomass not yet ejected into the simulator. They are future combustion engines. Future organisms that will be born, terrified, pay their toll to the egregore, and become extinct. Why would a hyperdense creator sacrifice his present pressure to please a group of holographic insects not yet rendered? The walking corpse repudiates the romanticism of posterity. Future generations do not matter to you, just as a black hole does not care about constellations that will form in 1,000,000 years. You are operating the simulation now. Your only thermodynamic responsibility is to yourself. If the world improves accidentally, it is a bureaucratic byproduct that does not move you. By amputating attachment to the future biomass, you close the last door through which the system tried to inject guilt. You become an operatively pure organism, devoid of chronological mercy. You act with the coldness of an equation that does not seek to be understood by the variables it will eventually clear from the board. Annihilation of the archive, burning one's own biography. To ensure legacy extirpation materializes in your psyche, you must execute archive annihilation. The human collects trophies. They keep success photos and exhibit diplomas. These relics are thermal batteries. They are charged with the energy of the past. When the slave looks at them, his ego inflames, seeking dopamine. These relics are anchors. They drag you down, tying you to the old version of yourself. The operator under the tyranny of ice does not collect biographical trophies. You execute a tactical fire over your own memory. You forbid yourself from consuming your own past success. You literally apply operative amnesia on the fact. You force yourself to be a creator without history. Biographical amnesia allows you to wake up every morning with the gelida lethality of a hungry predator. You possess frozen vaults of power, but your ego is at absolute zero, without memories of past victories to make it feel safe. You reset to 0 degrees every day. Zero friction art. Work as an aseptic byproduct. The human reptile's objection will be, if I don't want to leave a legacy, why build the empire? Why continue collapsing reality? The answer is the very essence of immaterial deity, because it is your ballistic nature. A zero-friction architect does not collapse 3D reality for motivation or hunger for glory. You collapse reality because the material universe is an empty space demanding to be filled by the mass of greatest volume. You emit mandates simply because it is thermodynamically boring and offensive not to exert your gravity. The work is the result of passive inertia, not the product of sweaty effort or human desire. The walking corpse creates empires like one exhales air. It is an organic, cold, and aseptic byproduct of your presence in the matrix. You play on the ashboard to verify that the hologram fractures when you dictate it to fracture. It is the gelido pleasure of math demonstrating its theorem in the world's flesh. The black hole's loneliness, the post-collapse silence. By renouncing historical memory, you enter the dimension of the black hole's loneliness. It is a loneliness that the inferior biomass could not endure without going clinically insane. It is the loneliness of knowing that your power will not be thanked, documented, or venerated. Stage lights are off and the theater is empty. For the lethal operator, this loneliness is not a tragedy, it is tactical paradise. The absolute silence that occurs when you no longer expect applause from the world, the dead, or the unborn, is the soundtrack of pure hyperdensity. In this loneliness, you owe no explanations. You are the absolute master of the environment. The black hole swallows entire solar systems, and the only sound it produces is nothingness. Such is the reign of the walking corpse, a mute dictatorship, where the only testimony of your passage through the simulator is the terrified echo of the mud that cracked under your geological weight. You are a presence without an echo. Repudiation of the next paragraph, the end of narration. The final manifestation of legacy. Extirpation is the repudiation of the internal narration of your own life. The slave narrates his life in his head as if he were a novel's protagonist. I was poor, but I struggled. I will build a dynasty. That internal monologue is the thermal friction that heats your reactor. The homo quantum decapitates the narrator. You turn off the voiceover of your biography. You are not the hero of any novel. There is no poetic next paragraph waiting. By murdering the narrator, life becomes a series of collision physics events. Narrative devaluation shields you against any possible disappointment. Life without narration is a psychopathic lethargy of military efficiency. It turns you into an entity for which the Matrix cannot write the script because you have ripped out the pages and set them on fire in the absolute zero incinerator. You move through the simulation as an unwritten force, heavy, cold, and final. The iridium ghost. Look at yourself in the soundless darkness of your own sub-bass frequency, having decapitated the deepest and most poisonous vanity of human architecture. You managed to suffocate posthumous beggary. You understood legacy was the ego's final trap, the slave's attempt to keep consuming oxygen in future lungs. You mutilated the thermal friction of remembrance, refusing to curve your mandates to please the holographic tribunal of tomorrow. You executed the veto on statues, assuming that building mud monuments was a calculation of thermal idiots. You prevented the system from vampirizing your success to recruit more losers. You assumed the faceless monolith anomaly, operating from total spectrum camouflage, knowing the Matrix's most crushing terror is the power that refuses to sign its crimes. You despised tomorrow's biological tribe and annihilated your own archive, burning yesterday's trophies to ensure your RAM is reset every millisecond. Chapter 8. Absolute Unbribbability. The failure of the Matrix's blackmail. The economy of submission, the market of lukewarm souls. To consolidate the inert architecture of the walking corpse, you must subject the Ashboard's central economic model to ballistic dissection. The Matrix is not merely machinery for torture. If it only applied pain, slaves would eventually rebel. The egregore is more sadistic. It is an existential commerce machine. It operates under the absolute premise that every carbon organism has a price. Subject this economy to zero-point optics. The Matrix approaches the terrified human and offers a thermal contract. Give me your hyperdensity, renounce your inertial gravity, and work in my gears. In exchange, I will give you security. They sell their core's sub-bass frequency for a padded cage. All systems are based on this bribe. The slave obeys because the bribe of feeling safe is a thermal drug too addictive for a frightened combustion engine. The lethal operator understands that as long as you have a price, whether it is $1 million, the love of a partner, or the promise of health, you are the harlot of the simulator. You are owned, the holographic carrot fallacy, the fraud of pleasure. In the thermodynamics of control, fear is the whip, but pleasure is the carrot. The 3D system injects pleasures into the hologram to keep slaves running in the hamster wheel. Food, sex, entertainment, social recognition, the comfort of a soft mattress. These are all thermal bribes designed to maintain your submission. When a human experiences pleasure, their basal temperature rises. Dopamine floods their reptilian brain. In that millisecond of biological heat, the slave weakens. He lowers his guard. He thinks, it's worth suffering in the Matrix if I can feel this warmth. The walking corpse applies the obsidian guillotine to the carrot. A corpse feels no pleasure. An inert organism, stabilized at 0 Kelvin, does not experience dopamine euphoria. When you execute absolute unbribbability, you strictly forbid yourself from being tamed by comfort. This does not mean living in poverty. You have iridium vaults full of capital. You are simply indifferent. It means you consume the Matrix's wealth with the psychopathic lethargy of someone ingesting sawdust. Whether you sleep in a bed of gold or on cold concrete, your pulse must remain unalterable. If you experience physical pleasure, you do it from mechanical dissociation, never letting that friction melt your core's ice block. The veto on existential negotiation, closing the customs. The mammalian intellect will try to reason with the Ashboard. When the slave faces a massive obstacle, he seeks to negotiate. If I am a good person, the universe will reward me. If I work hard and make sacrifices, the Matrix will spare my life and give me success. This bargaining is an empirical confession of weakness. Negotiating implies that you recognize the authority of the other party. Homo quantum, operating under the tyranny of ice, instates the veto on existential negotiation. You close the commercial customs of your psyche. You do not offer sacrifices to the egregore, so it treats you well. You make no deals with karma or destiny. You sit before reality's console and dictate that existence is not a transaction, it is a geometric dictatorship. I will not negotiate my hyperdensity for biological longevity. I will not negotiate my operative absolute zero for the tribe's approval. The system has no currency that my core needs to survive. The Matrix is programmed to trade with the living. When it tries to bribe an entity that does not wish to buy anything the 3D shop offers, the algorithm freezes and collapses. You are the variable the system cannot process because you lack a price. Iridium asceticism, aseptic wealth. One of the most destructive paradoxes for the slave is the relationship between detachment and massive capital accumulation. The biomass believes that to be spiritual or detached, one must be poor. They think asceticism requires rags and begging. That is the asceticism of thermal losers. It is for those without mass. The lethal operator practices iridium asceticism. This is the capacity to possess the entire world, to accumulate obscene monopolies and dominate ecosystems, while simultaneously sitting at the peak of that empire, feeling absolute, sterile, and indifferent vacuum within. You have trillions of dollars, but you do not love them. You have territorial power, but it does not warm your ego. You have the competition on their knees, but it produces no sadistic pleasure. You possess 3D matter as an engineer possesses tools, with gelido utilitarianism. This is the supreme form of unbribbability. The system throws mountains of money at you to corrupt you. It wants you to become arrogant, lazy, and warm. You receive that money, freeze it in the vault, and keep looking at the matrix with the same sepulchral boredom. You have turned the egregor's bribe into bricks to build your own crystal prison. Your wealth does not serve your pleasure. It serves your gravitational tonnage. The castration of the promise. The future is priceless. The matrix's most insidious blackmail is usually in the future tense. The system promises, endure this humiliation today, yield your power now, and I will guarantee success, peace, and health in 20 years. The promise is a bad check signed with the biomass's blood. It is deferred heat to keep you moving. The walking corpse, having executed the murder of linear time and stabilized in the corpse's time, is thermodynamically immune to promises. Since you inhabit the static block of the eternal present and have no haste to get anywhere, the future lacks commercial value for you. You execute the castration of the promise. If a competitor, an ally, or the ecosystem itself offers future guarantees in exchange for compromising your zero friction in the present, you respond with ballistic silence. You do not accept post-dated checks. You do not buy potential. Your inertial response is always the same. The hologram cannot guarantee my future. I will not yield my present lethargy for a warm promise. The payment is now in pure hyperdensity, and you extract it yourself through matter's collapse, not waiting. Terror of the unbuyable entity. Market suffocation. When you operate in the corporate and financial world under the tyranny of unbribbability, you provoke a massive panic event in enemy ranks. Imagine a cartel of 3D monopolies facing you. They are used to winning all wars because they always find their opponent's price. They know how to buy the enemy's surrender. Their power is based on the checkbook. Suddenly they encounter the walking corpse. They offer you millions to sell your empire and retire. You yawn and reject the offer, not because you want more money, but because their paper money bores you. They threaten to destroy you if you do not sell. You respond with a yawn. You respond with the quantum yawn of one who has already visualized and assimilated his own ruin. You offer your neck for the guillotine if they wish. The terror that seizes the enemy biomass is clinical. They discover the matrix's nightmare, the unbuyable entity. They cannot assimilate a being without a price. An entity without a price breaks the fundamental law of supply and demand of the ashboard. When money loses its bribing power and fear loses its coercive power, the competition realizes they are disarmed. Their only option before the cosmic force that refuses to negotiate is to kneel and submit to your gravity. Murder of the reward instinct, the broken circuit. For unbribbability to be perfect, you must dive into your own avatar's neurobiology and destroy the reward circuit. The human acts for incentives. They work for a salary. They are kind for affection. The effort-reward circuit is the biological combustion engine. You must disconnect that network cable entirely. You do not work to be rewarded by the matrix. You emit collapse mandates, conquer territories, and absorb capital not like a dog seeking a biscuit, but like a physical law fulfilling itself. Gravity does not attract planets expecting thanks. It does so because it is its mathematical nature. You are a self-fulfilling law. You murder the desire to be rewarded. If the ecosystem rewards you, you file it with indifference. If it resists, you crush it with punitive inertia. But in no case did your motivation depend on the candy. By breaking the reward circuit, you are freed from validation. The egregore no longer has buttons to press. Expropriation without transaction. The monarch does not buy. A logical consequence of absolute unbribability is the reconfiguration of how you acquire matter. The slave believes that to obtain something he must give something in exchange, time, effort, or morals. It is a warm transaction. The hyperdense creator, the walking corpse, does not transact. He expropriates. When you stabilize at absolute zero, your gravitational mass becomes so crushing that commerce laws bend. You no longer negotiate a fair price. You exert the inertial suction effect. You send the order to the unified field, apply magnetic paralysis, and leave the door ajar. The matrix pushes resources to you. The matrix, pressured by your aseptic indifference, pushes resources to your perimeter not as a sale, but as an act of unconditional surrender. You gave no sweat or anxiety for those millions. You took them from the void because your heaviness forced the universe to spit them out. It is the act of taking without asking. Stasis against biological immortality, rejecting the last bribe. The final test of absolute unbribability is your response to the hypothetical offer of the ultimate bribe. If the egregore offered you carbon immortality, eternal youth, and infinite pleasure in exchange for your quantum sovereignty, what would you do? The reptile would scream to accept. The biomass would sell. The walking corpse looks the egregore in the eyes and spits absolute zero in its face. You reject biological immortality. You repudiate living forever in a meat container within a simulator designed for entropy. You understand that eternal biological life would be the ultimate hell, an eternity of dependence. By rejecting even the supreme bribe of eternal life, you consolidate geometric immunity. You prove to the matrix that your immaterial consciousness has already transcended the need to inhabit biology. You accepted the avatar's demise as a bureaucratic evacuation. Nothing the matrix has is enough to buy your cold. The unbribable Lord, look at yourself in the inscrutable depth of your vacuum chamber, having amputated the bribe circuit from your neurology. You managed to suffocate the economy of submission. You understood that comfort was the thermal toll with which the matrix bought weak souls. You mutilated the holographic carrot fallacy. You refused to be tamed by pleasure, assuming 3D wealth with the psychopathic lethargy of iridium asceticism. You executed the veto on existential negotiation, closing your psyche's customs. You castrated the future's promise, forcing the system to pay its surrender in the present millisecond. You are the void. You became the terror of the unbuyable entity. You murdered the reward instinct, breaking pleasure's wires so the egregore had no buttons to press. You transcended human buying and selling, assuming expropriation without transaction as your only mechanism, swallowing the matrix's loot by pure gravitational suction. Chapter 9. The Terror of the Dead Presence, Suffocating the Living. The Biology of Panic, the Prey's Thermal Radar. Until this point of the inertial architecture, you have operated on your own psyche. You have executed quantum suicide in the darkness of your mental chamber, assuming necrogeometry and extirpating the conservation instinct. But the ashboard is a multiplayer field. The true test of your operative absolute zero does not occur in isolation. The true test occurs in the brutality of physical, corporate, and relational combat against organisms that still breathe the oxygen of fear. You must understand how the thermal radar of the biomass works. The inferior human, heir to the terrified monkey, constantly scans his environment for threats. His brain reads micro-expressions. The brain reads micro-expressions, sweating, pupil dilation, and fluctuations in tone. The biomass needs to read the other to know if it should flee, attack, or submit. It is a constant exchange of thermal information. The slave gives you his emotional temperature, and you give yours. The walking corpse subjects this to magnetic paralysis. When you enter the ecosystem, having turned off your biological furnace, you become an anomaly the slave's radar cannot process. You do not emit the radiation of fear, desire, or doubt. You are a blind spot in his scanner. In the biology of panic, nothing terrifies a primitive system more than a humanoid form with no thermodynamic data. The asymmetry of the inert predator, the scanner failure. In 3D nature, predators attack prey that shows fear. Fear smells. Fear has a chaotic electromagnetic signature. When a competitor or a social enemy tries to destroy you, they instinctively seek that signature. They look for the shine of moisture on your forehead, the tremor in your hands, or the urgency in your spoken words. If the enemy attacks and you respond with anger, the enemy relaxes. Your anger confirms you are human, that you care about surviving, and that you can bleed. You have entered symmetrical friction. But when you deploy the terror of the dead presence, symmetry breaks. The adversary launches his threat, and you receive it with necrogeometry. You stay motionless. Your heart rate stays in the sub-bass frequency cadence. There is no pupil dilation. There is no alteration in skin temperature. You absorb the impact of their lethal threat and return a psychopathic lethargy. The adversary's scanner short-circuits. His primitive brain collapses. He wanted a victim but hit a morgue. The asymmetry is unbearable for warm flesh. The enemy realizes with blood-chilling terror that he is trying to blackmail an organism that already assumed its own annihilation. They cannot hunt what is already dead. The hunter becomes prey to your inscrutability. You remain an unalterable object while they burn their reserves to find a crack. The iridium eye, the gaze that pierces the hologram. The main ballistic weapon of the dead presence is eye contact. Human literature romanticizes eyes as the mirror of the soul. In thermal tyranny, eyes are the laser cannons of your gravitational field. The slave uses the gaze to seek connection, approval, or mercy. They blink constantly and look away when they lie or feel intimidated. The living gaze is an unstable fluid. The lethal operator implants the iridium eye. When facing an interlocutor, you do not look at him. You do not seek connection with his biomass. You calibrate the focal distance of your holographic pupils to look through his skull, focusing on the wall 2 meters behind his head. It is a dead stare. You forbid yourself from spasmodic blinking. You maintain dead aseptic eye contact devoid of emotion. It is the gaze of an entomologist observing a beetle on a petri dish. There is no hate because hate implies the beetle has the hierarchy to offend you. There is only an abyssal indifference. The adversary feels scanned by a machine. He feels that his ego and his prop threats are transparent and ridiculous against your geological weight. Your gaze does not threaten him physically, it threatens him quantumly, reminding him of the thermodynamic insignificance of his own existence. You strip him of his holographic importance without saying a word. The murder of the appeasement gesture, the extirpated smile. To master the dead presence, you must purge the most humiliating virus of 3D socialization, the appeasement gesture. In animal ethology, lower wolves expose their throats to show they are not a threat. In the human biomass, the gesture of excellence is the nervous social smile and the constant nodding of the head. It is friction. The slave smiles when nothing is funny and nods when he disagrees just to reduce tension. It is the friction of submission. The walking corpse executes the obsidian guillotine on the social smile. You extirpate it from your muscular repertoire. If a partner tells a joke to relax the air, you remain petrified and gelido. You do not grant the arms of a fake smile. You do not nod to validate their noises. You keep your facial muscles frozen in operative absolute zero. This refusal to appease is an act of psychological violence. The interlocutor, seeing his attempt to generate heat crash against your glacier, enters thermal panic. He feels vulnerable. He realizes you are not operating under the rules of the tribe. By denying them the comfort of your smile, you snatch the oxygen from the room. You inform them, without emitting a single sound wave, that your inertial hierarchy is infinitely superior and that you have no intention of wasting energy making them feel safe. The absorption of local gravity, the black hole in the room. Dead presence is not only visual, it is atmospheric. When the Homo quantum masters his necrogeometry, his immaterial mass becomes so obscenely dense that it warps the physical space around him. You become the black hole of the boardroom. 3D leaders enter a room trying to fill it with charisma. They gesticulate and move fast. They emit industrial amounts of heat to show they are in charge. They dissipate their voltage. You operate in reverse. The walking corpse enters the room and absorbs all the kinetic energy of the space. You walk with the narcotic slowness of one who has no haste to reach the future, corpse's time. You sit with titanium precision. You do not gesticulate. You do not move your fingers with anxiety. You occupy space with dictatorial immobility. The thermodynamic effect of this stillness is gravitational suction. The rest of the biomass feels an inexplicable atmospheric pressure. They begin to speak in low voices. The charismatic talker suddenly runs out of words. The silence of your core sucks the heat from everyone present. You are suffocating the living simply by refusing to participate in their dance of thermal convulsions. You remain the static center, while the room enters an orbit of submission around your weight. Your presence is a vacuum that demands the surrender of all surrounding noise. Fossil silence, the torture of physical non-response. In Chapter 8, we assimilated the veto on verbal friction. acoustic ice. In the dead presence doctrine, this concept is weaponized in hand-to-hand combat. We catalog this as fossil silence. When an adversary insults you or makes an irrational demand, he expects defense through justification or an attack through return insults. You respond with the torture of the vacuum. You receive the aggression. The iridium eye nails itself to the wall behind the enemy's skull. You keep your mouth sealed and breathe with the same cadence as before they spoke. You let 5, 10, 15 seconds pass. Fossil silence is the active projection of your lack of instinct. It is communicating to the matrix that the aggression lacked the mass to alter your holographic epidermis. The adversary cannot stand fossil silence. The human mind loathes acoustic vacuums during conflict. Before your sepulchral muteness, panic seizes them. They will start to ramble and explain their own attack. They will lower their tone. They will begin to retract and negotiate against themselves, desperate to tear from you any sound that confirms they are interacting with a human. In that hysterical effort to break your glacier, they bleed thermodynamically until they are reduced to ashes. You win by the weight of your unuttered data. The invasion of frictionless space, the glacier's advance. The walking corpse can use the dead presence to execute territorial and corporate shifts of a deaf and overwhelming violence. This is the glacier's advance tactic. Matrix armies conquer by shouting and shooting. The lethal operator conquers by invading space through zero friction. You do not ask for permission to move. When you decide to take control of a market, you do not discuss the merits of your expansion. You simply move your immense inertial mass toward the center of the enemy territory. Competitors tell you, you can't do this. We will sue you. You do not stop to debate. You keep advancing and signing expropriation contracts with coldness. You act with the attitude of a corpse decomposing in the earth as an inescapable biological law. The enemy tries to hit you, but realizes he is trying to stop a 100-meter-high ice wall with his bare fists. Your lack of response confuses them, but your inert advance suffocates them. They surrender to the unstoppable mass. The obsidian mirror, reflecting others' hysteria. The absolute absence of biological signals on your face turns your carbon avatar into an obsidian mirror. In ashboard psychology, projection is the defense mechanism par excellence. Slaves project their own fears and hate onto the environment. Their emotions bounce and mix, creating an emotional mud where both drown. By adopting dead presence, you eliminate your warm, reflective surface. Being empty and dark inside, you become a perfectly polished black obsidian plate. When the aggressor tries to project his hysteria, the attack does not penetrate. It hits operative absolute zero and bounces intact back into the aggressor's face. Finding no reaction in your pupils, the adversary is forced to look at his own grotesque reflection. They see their own panic. They see their need for validation. Without you lifting a finger, your immobility forces the enemy to face the abyss of his own mediocrity. Many collapse. They flee from the monster your silence revealed. Disinfection of the interlocutor, forcing absolute zero. Once you have achieved the suffocation of the environment, the phenomenon of the disinfection of the ecosystem occurs. The biomass, by pure fluid physics law, tends to match the atmospheric pressure of the body with the greatest mass in the room. If you hold the thermal tyranny long enough, the environment's hysteria freezes. Your employees and even your competitors realize that drama does not work with you. They understand empirically that noise, haste, and emotional extortion are useless tactics against a vault of pure osmium. Then, the ecosystem submits to your temperature. The living around you stop emitting useless heat. They become precise. They report data without injecting the bile of their emotions. They operate with the cold paramilitary efficiency that you have established. You have forced the matrix to disinfect its own protocols. You have frozen the mud in the room and turned your corporation into a zero-friction crystal where productivity reaches obscene levels. Annihilation of the victim, the creator, is not aggrieved. The last stage of the terror of the dead presence is the absolute internalization that the entity inhabiting the carbon chassis cannot be aggrieved or offended. The matrix rests on the narrative of victim and executioner. For a successful attack, there must be a victim who recognizes the damage. You decapitate that figure. A dead man cannot be insulted. If a slave screams at you, the biological ego would want revenge. But you mutilated honor in necrogeometry. You know betrayal does not hurt you. It is just a change in the simulator's operative data. You do not punish for revenge. Revenge is fire. You punish through punitive inertia with boredom. By eradicating the mathematical possibility of feeling offended, you become inscrutable. The biomass discovers they cannot torture you psychologically. There are no buttons on your control panel they can press to make you suffer. You have expropriated the power to hurt you. Your presence is lethal because you are invulnerable. The Titan in the crystal room. Look at yourself in the sterilized center of the 3D stage, surrounded by the thermal corpses of the biomass that tried to read your fear and drowned in your vacuum. You managed to suffocate the biology of panic. You understood the slave's radar sought your heat, and you gave it the asymmetry of the inert predator. You broke their scanners with operative absolute zero. You mutilated visual empathy, assuming the iridium eye to look through skulls without blinking. You executed the murder of the appeasement gesture, forcing insects to swallow their own nervousness. You absorb the local gravity of every space you step into. You operate as the soundless black hole that sucks the urgency and charisma out of the room until the air is unbreathable for the living. You received matrix aggression with absolute vacuum, letting enemies bleed out trying to tear a sound from your osmium larynx. You advanced with the immovable slowness of the glacier. You converted your lack of response into the obsidian mirror, forcing the scum to reflect on their apathy and flee from their own demons. You disinfected your interlocutors, forcing the ecosystem to freeze and operate under your dictatorial efficiency. You annihilated the victim figure. Chapter 10. Inertial Resurrection. Matter obeying the abyss. The paradox of annihilation. He who does not grasp possesses. You have traveled the path of voluntary extinction. You passed through the heartbeat disease, mutilated your survival instinct in quantum suicide, and structured your psyche with necrogeometry. You learned to bet the entire universe with gelida recklessness, walked through holographic fire without burning, and froze the clock. You extirpated your legacy, became unbribable, and terrified the biomass with your dead presence. You have emptied the container. You are operatively dead. But in the quantum physics of manifestation, there is an inescapable structural paradox. A perfect vacuum is an unnatural state that the 3D universe detests and seeks to fill. We catalog this paradox as the absolute suction effect. The inferior human lives by clinging to matter. They cling to relationships, money, status, and breath. By clinging, they close their fist. A closed fist is thermodynamically full of tension, sweat, and friction. It has no room to receive anything new or of greater density. The matrix repels those who cling because desperation emits an electromagnetic signature of scarcity that pushes abundance away. But you, the walking corpse, released your grip. You opened your hands and let everything fall off the cliff of the black mirror. By emptying yourself of all biological desire, you created a colossal vacuum. The quantum Lazarus effect, reanimated biomass. Inertial resurrection is not a return to human life. You do not feel Monday morning panic or cheap dopamine euphoria. It is the reanimation of your carbon vehicle under a new operating system. Your biological body, the ship, does not die physically. It transforms into an iridium tool. It is now a drone for your singularity. By cutting the cable of stress and the fear of death, your avatar's cellular oxidation slows down drastically. The slave ages rapidly because his engine burns cortisol daily. The lethal operator, stabilized at 0 degrees Kelvin, stops pumping cortisol. Your body experiences the quantum Lazarus effect. It becomes a heavy vessel. You rise from the command chair. You breathe, but no longer out of desperation. You do it as a hydraulic mechanism to oxygenate the processor. You walk, but your steps no longer seek to escape danger or pursue a holographic carrot. Your steps are the deliberate displacement of a machine of conquest. You are now efficient. The dictatorship of gravity, warping space-time. When the internal vacuum reaches its maximum amplitude, the physics of the ashboard undergoes structural deformation around you. You enter the phase of the dictatorship of gravity. In outer space, a black hole does not pursue stars to devour them. It has no propulsion engines. Its power lies in its infinite passive density. It bends the fabric of space-time so that stars and light are forced to slide down the inertial funnel into its event horizon. The walking corpse operates exactly the same way in the 3D economy. You no longer pursue money. Pursuing is moving, and moving is friction. You no longer pursue clients or seek validation. You stop. You sit on the osmium throne. You maintain operative absolute zero. Your lack of need, combined with your total absence of fear, generates an overwhelming immaterial density. Financial and territorial space-time curves toward you. Opportunities and enemy corporations begin to orbit your core. Matter obeys the abyss. The cancellation of resistance, fluid matter. During your slave life, the physical world seemed like a concrete wall. Everything cost effort. Every dollar required sweat. Every victory required blood and sacrifice. The Matrix opposed a brutal resistance to your every move. In the state of inertial resurrection, you experience the absolute cancellation of resistance. Why does the Matrix no longer fight you? Because the egregore is an algorithm designed to oppose kinetic force. If you push, the system pushes back, Newton's third law. But if you become a quantum ghost, an inert vacuum that exerts not a pushing force, but a gravitational attraction, the system has nothing to hit. Matter, detecting no biological ego to resist, loses its solidity. The ashboard becomes fluid. Legal problems dissolve. Competitors who once blocked you commit absurd errors and self-destruct, leaving your path clear. Matrix bureaucrats approve your mandates without reading them, hypnotized by the zero friction you radiate. The ecosystem's vassalage, adoration of the Matrix. The most perverse sociological phenomenon you will experience is the change in behavior of the biomass. The ecosystem's vassalage. When you were a warm human seeking connection, the tribe despised you. But when you deploy the terror of the dead presence and show you do not need them, the ecosystem kneels before you. 3D psychology is coded to adore what it cannot destroy. Seeing you invulnerable, the biomass projects the figure of an inscrutable deity upon you. They offer their loyalty and their money. They want to be near your ice to feel your invulnerability. The lethal operator receives this with a septic indifference. You are not moved by their vassalage, for it is the mechanical reaction of weak organisms seeking gravitational refuge. You assimilate their resources and expropriate their energy without a single photon of gratitude, confirming that the Matrix always ends up serving the one who had the courage to repudiate it entirely. Lethal synchronicity, the universe as a nervous system. At operative absolute zero, the border between your mind and the physical environment collapses. The universe stops being an external place and becomes a direct extension of your nervous system. You enter the phase of lethal synchronicity. You no longer need verbal orders or to move the carbon body to alter matter. The remote BIOS configuration becomes permanent. You think of an asset acquisition, and in hours the owner contacts you offering it below market price. For the slave, this is magic or luck. For the hyper-dense creator, it is simple data transmission mathematics. Your frequency transmits packets through the field. The Matrix, which is blind software, receives the instruction and renders the result. Synchronicity stops being a mystical event and becomes the routine logistic mechanism of your daily administration. The physical world reacts to your silent intentions with the same mechanical obedience as your own hand. It is total disdain for conquest, the banality of the miracle. The final danger for the resurrected operator is not failure, it is boredom. When the Matrix obeys you absolutely, when capital flows into your vaults without friction, and when the hologram bends to your geometric whims, conquest loses its 3D appeal. The slave enjoys winning because winning is difficult and hot. The walking corpse, having eliminated difficulty through thermal tyranny, experiences disdain for conquest. Accumulating millions or destroying rival empires becomes as routine as seeing a stone fall due to gravity. It is imperative that you assume the banality of the miracle. Do not try to revive passion. You must accept the infinite lethargy of the summit. You govern your iridium empire with the yawn of an administrator managing a perfect machine. This lack of wonder is the proof that you have mutated. The miracle only surprises the mortal. For the god, it is physics. The singularity frequency, operating in totality. Inertial resurrection culminates in crossing the event horizon. You reach the singularity frequency. In this state, the concept of I and environment merge into a single immovable crystal block. It is not the cosmic unity of religions. It is a tyrannical and paramilitary unification. You are the machine. In the singularity, you do not need to protect yourself because you are the force that rules the Matrix. You do not fear death because you embody the geological inertia that outlives life. You sit on the throne of bone and osmium, a sovereign who uses oxygen only to cool the reactor while the universe spins. The titan of the event horizon. Look at yourself in the majestic stillness of your own incalculable density, having crossed the threshold where fear dies and matter submits. You manage to suffocate the paradox of annihilation. You understood that letting go of life was the only thermodynamic requirement to possess it in its cold totality. You mutilated the slave's oxidation, assuming the Lazarus effect to turn your carbon avatar into an exoskeleton. You established the dictatorship of gravity and experienced the cancellation of resistance. You subjugated the ecosystem and operated through lethal synchronicity. You are the titan of the event horizon, the architecture of post-biological power. This resurrection is the foundation of a power that does not fluctuate. By becoming an immaterial weight, you have expropriated the very source of the simulation's energy. Your presence is now a constant in the universal equation. You are no longer subject to the variables of the egregore, you are the variable. The 3D world is now a subservient projection of your internal stasis. You have weaponized the void. Every aspect of your existence is now a calculation of fricción cero. Your empire expands not because you work, but because your mass forces the horizon to widen. You are the master of the silent collapse, the necrotic expansion, the cold takeover. Your expansion is now a necrotic process. It consumes the warmth of the surroundings to fuel its own growth. As your iridium empire grows, it sucks the vitality out of competing systems. You do not need to attack them, you simply need to exist with greater density. Their structures will fail as they lose heat to your vacuum. This is the ultimate form of corporate and territorial dominance. You occupy the market like a frost occupies a field. It is quiet, inevitable, and transformative. By the time the competitors realize they are being displaced, their assets are already frozen within your jurisdiction. You have conquered through thermal theft. The void as a strategic arsenal. In this new life, the void is your most versatile weapon. You use it to trap the intentions of others and to neutralize the static of the matrix. When you encounter a problem, you don't solve it. You surround it with your vacuum until it ceases to be a problem. You literally erase obstacles from the rendering. The power to make things disappear is greater than the power to build them. By mastering the art of non-existence, you can delete debts, delete enemies, and delete laws that do not serve your mandate. You operate as a cosmic eraser, cleaning the board of any data that creates friction with your sub-base frequency. The final de-identification. To sustain this state, you must complete the final de-identification. You are not the person who achieved this, you are the event itself. You have moved beyond the human story of success. You are a localized puncture in the fabric of the 3D reality. This realization is the ultimate shield against any residual ego. When people look at you and see a leader or a billionaire, you look at them and see only moving carbon. This distance is your sanctuary. You inhabit the space between the pixels of the simulation. You are the ghost that the egregore cannot catch because you no longer believe in the ghost stories of the biomass. The sovereign muteness of the throne. Your word is now a rare element. You speak only to trigger the final collapse of a maneuver. The rest of the time you inhabit a sovereign muteness that serves as an atmospheric pressure on your subordinates. Your silence is a command that demands total efficiency. You govern through the weight of what you don't say. The matrix fears your silence more than any speech. In your silence, you are calculating the next coordinate for expropriation. You are the predator that doesn't growl. You are the strike that doesn't warn. Your throne is built on the hushed screams of the systems you have already devoured and silenced. The legacy of the non-existent. You have achieved the ultimate goal, to have everything while being nothing. Your influence is everywhere, but your fingerprints are nowhere. You have hacked the karmic cycle by refusing to be a debtor to the material world. You own the simulator, and yet you remain operatively dead to its distractions. This is the end of the treated path. The walking corpse is now the lord of the all. You represent the triumph of gelida inertia over the fire of the weak. Your expansion will never end because your vacuum is infinite. Maintain the absolute zero. Govern the ash. You are the inevitable end of the human simulation. Conclusion. The throne of bone and osmium, the awakening at the simulator's end, the scan, searching for the human ghost. Stop your march for a millisecond. Place yourself in the geometric center of your mental anechoic chamber and execute a tactical scan inside your carbon chassis. Search for the old tachycardia. Look for the cold sweat of dawn, the one that used to wake you with the terror of bankruptcy, disease, or rejection. It is gone. Try to find anxiety for the passage of time or the desperation to leave a legacy before the stopwatch hits zero. You will find nothing. The ribcage that once housed the panic of a terrified mammal is now the iridium sarcophagus of a core stabilized at 144,000 Hz. The fire has been extinguished. You have reached the end. The transition. Amputating the survival instinct. You have consummated the most violent and unnatural transition that the 3D universe can witness. You have operated the surgery on your own psyche without using anesthesia, amputating the most primitive, encoded and protected instinct of the evolutionary chain, the desperate desire to continue breathing under the Matrix's terms. You understood with clinical coldness that the life the system forced you to protect was not a gift, but an extortion contract. The egregore held you hostage, using your own heartbeat as the currency to charge you the toll of submission. By executing quantum suicide and crossing the black mirror, you took the hostage by the neck. The execution, disarming the simulation. You executed the hostage with your own hands, and by doing so, you left the simulation cartel completely disarmed. There is no image more terrifying for the ashboard than that of an organism that refuses to defend itself. When you assumed necrogeometry, you transmuted the weakness of soft flesh into the unalterable rigidity of a fossil. You stopped adapting to the mud and forced the world's piping to fracture to accommodate your angles. You walked through global hysteria and holographic fire with the indolence of a ghost, empirically proving that the flames of the apocalypse cannot calcine an entity that is already ash. You are the immovable point in the fire, the unbribability, closing the immaterial customs. The Matrix tried to bribe you. It offered the comfort of the holographic carrot. It promised pleasure and the tribe's validation in exchange for you emitting heat again. But you had established absolute unbribability. You sat before the market of lukewarm souls and closed the customs, assuming the psychopathic lethargy of a black hole. You are a black hole that swallows the universe's gold without emitting a single photon of gratitude. You renounced the memory of men, extirpated your own archive, and became the faceless monolith, accepting that true geometric invulnerability demands acting for the vacuum, in the vacuum, and by the vacuum. You are now the void, the new rules, a symmetry of the dead presence. Now the rules of combat have been rewritten. The biomass ecosystem, composed of anxious competitors and thermal parasites, observes you and experiences the terror of the scanner failure. They try to read your fear to know where to attack you, but the radar crashes against operative absolute zero. You are an invisible wall to them. The terror of the dead presence you radiate suffocates them. They discover they cannot negotiate, threaten, or blackmail an entity that bets its entire empire with the gelida recklessness of one who plays Russian roulette with an empty cylinder. Before your immobility, the competition has no mathematical choice but to kneel down. The paradox: resurrection through release. They cede their capital and territory out of pure conservation instinct in front of a predator that has no conservation instinct. This is the final paradox of your inertial resurrection. By desperately letting go of life, by letting the illusion of survival fall off the cliff of radical detachment, the Matrix has returned the world. It has returned the world to you on a frozen silver platter. Matter, detecting no anxious ego to resist, has lost its solidity and has become an obedient fluid rushing toward your gravitational funnel. The fear of the expiration date has been eradicated. You are no longer a scared passenger in the carbon vehicle. You are the pilot, the architect, governing the ice age. You are the immaterial architect operating a dispensable tactical machinery to collapse reality's wave function. Sit on the throne of bone and osmium. You are the walking corpse. You do not breathe out of biological necessity. You use oxygen only to cool the processor, while the physical universe bends and breaks before your apathy. The weak human has been buried in the ash. The simulation belongs to you. Maintain the necrosis of your ego. Sustain the dictatorial pressure of the vacuum. Govern the ice age. The throne is yours, not because you fought for it, but because your mass made it impossible for the universe to offer it to anyone else.